Welcome to the Schwowin's Nest. Thanks for clicking on my video today. I hope you like what you see, and if you do, I'd love it if you could hit that red subscribe button.
This is a basket that I picked up at the thrift store for $2.99. It has really good bones, but I just don't like the apples in that blue. So I gave it 3 coats of the Rust-Oleum flat white paint. For all of my projects today, I'm going to be printing off on white tissue paper, and this tissue paper is just from the dollar stores. I'm using Mod Podge and applying a thin coat to the basket, and then I'm going to be adding a label that I printed off on the tissue paper. If you want to know how exactly I do this with the tissue paper, I do have a full tutorial just on that down in my description box. So go check that out, because today I'm just going to basically be showing you how to get the IOD look for less. This graphic I got from thegraphicsfairy.com. I'll have that website linked down in my description box. If you haven't heard of that, you've got to go check her out. She's got thousands of different graphics that are free to use. All she asks you to do is sign up to her website. As I've placed the tissue paper down, I'm making sure that the brush that I'm using to put Mod Podge on top is nice and moist. You don't want to have a dry brush at all, because that will tear the tissue paper. Once it gets wet from the Mod Podge, it's very delicate. So what I'm doing here is just trying to kind of wedge that tissue paper in between all of the seams from the basket. Since this basket has little holes in it, I'm just using this little scoring tool from the Dollar Tree and very gently poking a hole in the tissue paper where all of the baskets are. Then I'm going to take my brush again with some Mod Podge and just kind of push it through the hole to make sure that all of those little bits and pieces are glued to the inside of the basket. You could also just take your brush to the inside of the basket and fold those over and make sure they're glued on. All of the floral images that I'm using today in this video came from Pixabay.com. That's another free site that you hear me talk about all the time, so if you follow my channel, you already know about it. I'm not going to be including these on my website because Pixabay is a free site. All you need to do is either click on the CAPTCHA button when you want to download something, or you can create a free account and then you can download whatever you want. Some of their images are also available as an SVG file, which means that you can use them with your cutting machine. After I was done with the one side, I added a couple more blossoms to the other side. When I'm done all of my projects like this, I always give them 1 or 2 coats of the matte clear spray by Rust-Oleum, and that just makes sure that the paint sticks and the image stays on there and nothing's going to peel off. I think this turned out absolutely gorgeous. What do you think? If you are new to my channel, I love farmhouse decor, and I especially love making things over, making something out of nothing, and creating beautiful home decor on a really skimpy budget. If that interests you, I would love it if you could hit that subscribe button and stick around a while. This tray is ceramic, and although it's kind of cute, it's just really not my style, and it's not even something that I would give away to somebody. So I gave it a couple of coats of the flat white Rust-Oleum paint and then went over it a couple of times with my chalk paint. Now I'm just adding another one of these Graphics Fairy transfers. Now you can get these transfers on the Graphics Fairy website backwards, which means that then it is a little reverse Mod Podge kind of thing, which I will be showing you that shortly. But I decided to just use the tissue paper and Mod Podge method for this as well. I'm going to take 3 roses for each of the other sections, and I'm going to have them kind of dropping in from the top portion. Again, just using Mod Podge and tissue paper, and these roses came from Pixabay. Again, just be really careful. Make sure your brush has quite a bit of Mod Podge on it. You don't want it fully loaded, but you don't want it dry either. Now, I know that this tray is not going to be food safe, even if I seal it with my Rust-Oleum matte clear sealer, but it can be used just as a beautiful decor piece. I could see this sitting on someone's dresser in their bedroom to hold some of their jewelry. It could be a little trinket dish, or maybe even sitting at the front door for keys and whatnot. So, lots of different ways that you could use a dish like this. I think this one turned out beautiful too. For this project, I'm going to be using a dollar store tag, but I'm also going to be using this graphic from the Graphics Fairy. If you take a look at the lettering down at the bottom, you can see that it's backwards. I printed this out on regular printer paper, and now I'm just using my brush to apply a generous coat of Mod Podge. Now, you don't want to go too heavy with the Mod Podge, but you need to make sure that all of it is covered really well. This is a technique that I learned watching Deidre from Our Upcycled Life. So make sure you go check her out. She does a lot of this reverse graphic and she's got it down pat. What I'm going to be doing here now is just putting the Mod Podge side down onto my tag that I painted with a couple of coats of white chalk paint. You're going to make sure that all of the bubbles are out of there. You want to smooth it out as best you can. Get any little extra edges of Mod Podge on there if you need it. Don't put it on the tag. Make sure that you put it on the paper. And then we're going to set this aside to dry for 24 hours. It's the next day, and now I've just got some paper towel that's fairly wet, and I'm going to be just rubbing it over the paper to make sure that it gets really good and damp. You don't want it soaking wet, but you want it nicely damp. And then what you do is you start peeling off the paper, and you do that simply by rubbing your fingers on it. And you can already see, even just using the paper towel, that the paper is starting to come off. But I'm going to continue using my finger and just start rubbing off the paper. Now, this turned out pretty good. This was only my second attempt at trying to get this done. I'm going to have to practice because I did lose a little bit of the image. But because I'm okay with rustic decor, I didn't mind that it looked a little faded in some spots. It takes a little bit of elbow grease to do this. You want to be firm yet gentle because if you rub it too hard, you will take some of that image off of your item. But I love how this turned out, and I think I'm going to be doing a lot more like this in the future. This teapot or coffee pot, whatever you want to call it, didn't need any paint prep, but I did give it a good cleaning. I'm going to take some Mod Podge again, and this time I'm going to be covering the whole side with the tissue paper transfer. I just thought that would look really pretty if it was covering the whole side. So I'm just going to be placing it on, and again, very gently with my brush and my fingers, just making sure that I get all of the tissue paper adhered. Yes, I'm going to get some wrinkles. Yes, it's going to look a little homemade, but I'm okay with that. I think it still looks absolutely gorgeous when it was done. And the other thing that I would thought when I was editing this video is I always find pieces that are white that have some kind of design on them that I cover up. And now I found something white that was plain and I'm adding a design to it. So it's just funny how things kind of go around and around. Since the petals and some of the leaves were going over the edge, I decided to just go with it. And instead of cutting them off, I'm just going to fold them over with the Mod Podge and just make it look very natural. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I decided to grab that little leftover leaf and put him right on the lid. Now you could definitely still use this as a coffee pot or a teapot just for serving, but you'd have to be super careful on how you wash it. It would be just basically wipe it out on the inside and very gently wipe the outside of it. It will also get a coat of, probably a couple coats of the matte clear finish. For this project, I'm using one of the houses that you can get at the Dollar Tree. I popped the back off and gave it a couple of coats of my DIY chalk paint. I'm going to now add this beautiful transfer to the top of it, and I have some different ideas for the bottom of it. The farm animal graphics that you see me working with now came from Pixabay.com. All you've got to do is type in vintage pig, vintage cow, vintage rooster, and they will show up, and you can go ahead and download them for absolutely free. These reminded me of the IOD stamps. I know they have some transfers like this too. I decided to use the little pig, and I'm going to Mod Podge him to the bottom of the sign. I do have a couple of items from IOD. I did pick up their vintage market clay molds, which has the cow, the pig, and the sheep. And I also have these sprig stamps, but those are the only two products that I really, really wanted to have. So I did save up and I splurged and got them for myself. But I won't be getting anything else because look what you can do with just a little piece of tissue paper. Here's the exterior of the house. I did paint the top part of it white so it would blend in a little bit better with the background. And now I'm taking another one of these little tissue paper flowers. I'm cutting some strips because I thought it would be really fun to add a little bit of some color and greenery to that top edge of the house. I'm going to just go along the bottom portion, up the side, and then a little bit on the opposite corner. And I think this turned out super cute. I got this picture from the thrift store. It was $5.99. I'm going to give it one coat of Rust-Oleum clear sealer just so the paint will stick a little bit better. I'm just using a regular paintbrush that I picked up at the dollar store and my homemade DIY chalk paint in white. I'm loving all of the brush strokes. It's starting to look like a real homemade clay picture. So I printed off some of these sprigs in just black and white on some tissue paper, and now I'm just going to cut them out. First, I put a layer of Mod Podge on the picture where the image is going to go, and then using my brush, I pick up the image and place it onto the Mod Podge. Then I'm just going to work from the inside out, making sure that my brush is always nice and moist with Mod Podge. Otherwise, I'm going to risk tearing the paper, and I don't want to do that. Then just smooth it out and pounce up and down on any of those bubbles and wrinkles, and just be gentle and work with it until you've got it completely adhered to the picture. For those of you who are going to just get my free printables, check out my website link down in the description box and head on over to my website where I will have all of these free printables for today's video available for download. I used 4 or 5 different designs of these little sprigs, and I filled the whole picture with them, starting from the bottom and going up in different heights and sizes. I really love how this one turned out, and I hope you do too. This candlestick is also thrifted, but it's seen a couple of different makeovers. So I decided to keep it black. It was already painted black, and I'm going to just use some clear wax that has a little drop of white paint in it. I'm going to apply it really generously to the candlestick, making sure I get in all of the little grooves and holes and whatever. And then I'm just going to take a paper towel and wipe some of it off and dab some of it away. And the white will stay inside all of the cracks, and it just turns out really beautiful. I've seen a lot of people use this technique, and I thought I would give it a try. I've done it with some other colors. I've not ever done it with black base and then a white on top, and I'm really loving how it's turning out. So you might see me doing a little bit more of this kind of style in the future. This is just a plastic pot that I had in my stash. I'm using the same rough brush and my DIY chalk paint in white, and I'm going to give this a couple of coats. Then I'm going to dress it up a little. Before I add any details to this pot, I'm going to make sure that the paint is going to stay. So I'm adding a layer of matte Mod Podge to seal it in. In my last video, I used these dot stickers from the Dollar Tree, and I wanted to give this pot a little bit of detail so it would blend a little bit better with the candlestick. And on the candlestick, there are some sort of bead-like embellishments. So I'm just going to give this pot just on the rim. I'm going to go all the way across on the bottom, and then I'm going to do another row on the top. I'm using the same technique that I did for my previous project using these dots. I just stuck them on with the sticky backing that they already have, but then I sealed them in with a really good coat of matte Mod Podge, and that will just make sure that they don't pop off. I felt like the pot was a little too white, so I'm taking some of my black chalk paint, which is also a DIY chalk paint. And if you're interested in that recipe, I've got it linked down in my description box. And I'm just going to give this one good coat all the way around the rim. This candlestick has an indentation on the top, and although my pot looks like it fits, it just is a little bit too big. So I'm adding this wood disc from the Dollar Tree. I'm just going to glue that on, and that will raise up the bottom. So once I put hot glue on the disc, the pot will stick to the disc and I'll get a good secure hold.
Using tissue paper and Mod Podge again, I'm going to attach this bee that is surrounded by a beautiful frame, and on the back I have some French script. Again, all available on my website as free printables. I'm going to go ahead and add this on and then continue adding more of the French script until I have the whole pot covered. I'm going to use the white paint and clear wax mixture again, put it all over the top rim of the pot, and then wipe it down, and this will just bring everything together and look really beautiful. This first one is with 3 of these thrifted frames that I found for $1.99. They were part of my last haul. I just thought the lines and the details were absolutely beautiful. So what I'm going to do first is paint all 3 of them with a couple coats of my DIY chalk paint. If you're interested in learning how to make that chalk paint, I have a recipe down in my description box. I thought about a few different ways to distress this. I could use some dark wax, or I could use some sandpaper, but I decided just to take my Cricut spatula here. You could use any type of metal scraping tool and just go ahead and scrape the paint off where I wanted the original gold and dark brown to show through. Using my computer and the Google Drawing program and Pixabay for free images, I created some printables that I'm going to print off on white cardstock and then just use a glue stick to glue them onto the original backing of the frame. I create a lot of my free printables in Google Drawing, so if you're interested in learning how to use that program, I just launched a tutorial a couple of days ago, and I'll have it linked down in my description box. I printed these out on white cardstock, and I love using my paper trimmer just to make sure that I get a nice straight line. Sometimes when I'm using my scissors, I get a little wonky, so having this type of tool is really handy when you're doing paper crafts. Once I have the glue applied and my paper stuck on the backing, I'm just going to tack it into the frame with a few dots of hot glue in the four corners, and then I'm going to use a generous amount of hot glue all the way around the backing to make sure that it's securely into the frame. When I use hot glue, I like to make sure that I hold it down a little bit because I want this cardboard to adhere to the sides of the frame. And with applying a whole bunch of hot glue, sometimes it's best just to hold it down and wait for that glue to set a bit and then move on to the next part. I had 3 of these frames, so I did a different flower for each frame.
For my second project, I'm using something that I haven't used in ages, and that is water slide decal paper. The brand I have is from Hippo. You print it off using your inkjet printer, and then you just take some clear matte spray. It doesn't really matter what brand it is, but I like Rust-Oleum, and this is the clear matte finish. You could also do a gloss finish if you want yours to be nice and glossy. You're going to give it a lot of spray. You can see how wet this is. Then you're going to let it dry and do it 2 more times. To speed up the drying process, I used my blow dryer and I pressed the cool button so it wouldn't be warm air coming out. It would be nice and cool, and that just dries it really well. Then you don't have to hang around and wait for each coat to dry, although it does dry fairly quickly on its own as well. Here's where the magic happens. You take some warm water. I just put this in a flat bowl like this, and I've already cut out my designs, and you can see that I've cut fairly close to the actual graphic. It does come out clear, but there is sort of a sticker look to it if you leave too much of the decal paper on the outside. Leave it in the water anywhere from 30 to 60 seconds, and once you can take that image and just use your thumbs and start to slide it off the paper, you know that it's ready for your transfer. Take your project, your item, your piece, whatever you're going to apply this to, make sure that it's been cleaned. Take a little bit of water with your finger and put it on top of your project. This will just make the decal easier to position and move around should you need to do that. So here I am. I'm going to take my flower design, and if you're not that experienced with it, I would say leave it on the backing paper, get it partially off, and then place it on your design. I just pulled it off and slapped it on, and because there's water underneath, you have lots of time to play with it. Probably a good 5 minutes before this is actually going to be solidly dry. And the reason being, I'm going to be taking a tissue and dabbing and pushing the water off of it. So while I'm doing this, I can still move my decal or my sticker or water slide decal, whatever you want to call it. I can still move it around and make sure that it's in the right spot. I have quite a few in-depth tutorials on how to use water slide decal paper, and I'll link them at the end of the video. I picked up this little ivory creamer and sugar at the thrift store. I think it was $3.99 for the pair, and they're in perfect condition. So I thought, because there's nothing wrong with them, I don't have to cover them up. The color is okay. I'm just going to embellish them a little bit with something quick and easy. And this was just the ticket. I think they turned out absolutely beautiful. I got the Magnolia design from Creative Fabrica. If you've never checked out their site, they have tons of beautiful graphics to use. The link is down in my description box. This next project is also going to be using a water slide decal, and this is the Farm Fresh Milk. You can do black and white with water slide decals as well as color. The one thing you need to remember though is there won't be any white printed out because printers don't have white. So if you're using anything on a darker sheet and you want white to show up, you'll need to paint that white first in order for any white to show up. I hope I'm making sense here. But anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and dunk my Farm Fresh Milk and then just put it on this pitcher that I've had sitting up on a shelf in my foyer. And I just had it plain. It didn't have anything on it, and it's been there for quite a few years, and I thought, you know what, it's time to dress this up just a little bit. So here I've got my big water slide decal. I'm laying it down, making sure that it's even. I can adjust it just a little bit before my time runs out and the water dries. Again, I'll just take my tissue and squeeze out all of the other water underneath it, just very gently by patting it down and pushing a little bit. And once it's dry, it's ready to be displayed. And I am so glad I used the Farm Fresh Milk. I think it looks absolutely gorgeous. To start off this first project, I'm going to be printing a design on tissue paper. I just use dollar store tissue paper, but I always make sure that the shiny side is facing down when I tape it onto a piece of printer paper. Now, some of you have mentioned that your printer paper gets stuck or it gets shredded because of the tissue paper on it. You could also try a piece of cardstock, which would be a little bit thicker. The other thing you could try is using some masking tape, which I find tends to help because it does make the paper itself a little bit thicker and a little bit easier for the printer to grab. On the sides of the tissue paper, I like to take the tape and fold it over like this. So it's got to be folded onto the back of the paper, and that just makes it even more secure. This is the design I'm going to use, and I have a link for it down in my description box. This is a little mini teapot that I'm going to use for this project. And to get rid of the shiny surface, I'm going to give it a really good coat of Rust-Oleum Clear Matte Finish. Once that dries, I'm going to use the color Sheepskin by Folk Art. This is a chalk paint, and I'm going to give everything a couple of really good coats, letting it dry really well in between. Another problem that some of you have asked me about is your inkjet printer running when you're printing it on the tissue paper. When you apply the Mod Podge, then it tends to run. What you can do is also use that same Rust-Oleum Clear Matte Finish. Give it a couple of sprays, let it dry for at least an hour, and then try it one more time. Most of the time, that Rust-Oleum will seal in the ink, and then you won't have any bleeding at all. I'm going to apply the tissue paper using Mod Podge, a thin amount just where I want the tissue paper to be, and then I'm going to place it on top. I cut this pattern into a diamond shape, and I'm just going to be putting 2 of those pieces on either side of the teapot. I'm not going to worry about the spout or the handle right now. Use a very light touch when you're pressing down with your paintbrush on top of the tissue paper. You don't want it to tear. I wanted this teapot to have a little bit of a French country look, so I did look online to see if I could find any inspiration, and this is what I came up with. I loved how the handle and the lid were painted a little differently, so I'm going to paint the knob and the handle and the spout and the bottom rim of my little teapot with this beautiful eucalyptus green color. I did a couple of coats of the green and made sure I got inside the spout. Once it was completely dry, I just sprayed it with a glossy finish sealer, and I think this turned out absolutely beautiful. I just love the pattern of it, and I hope you love it too.
This year, for some reason, my local Dollarama store has been putting out these awesome wooden bunnies that stand up on their own. I've used a different one for another project, but I thought this one was absolutely cute. I'm going to remove all of his little accessories and then go around the outside edge of him with some candle wax. This is going to allow me to distress the outside of the bunny really easily without having to use sandpaper. I gave the rabbit 2 coats of my DIY chalk paint on the front and the back. And now I am just using a plastic scraper and I'm scraping off the paint where I had applied the wax. And you can see that it's getting a beautiful distressed finish without having to use sandpaper. I did apply some wax to the body of the rabbit, but I think just giving the 2 coats of paint didn't allow any of the wax to come through. So I'm just taking my Cricut spatula, probably not the best tool to use. You could use a screwdriver or any other sharp object that you have, and I'm just scraping off in some areas some of the paint to give him more of a distressed look. I am going to be covering this bunny with all sorts of different layers of tissue paper printables. This is a French script that I put together, available on my website under the free printables tab. And I'm just going to cut it into pieces and then actually tear it up a little bit so I get my words sort of falling off the page, as you can see here where I'm placing him. I'm just going to be using some Mod Podge to apply it. And if you want a full tutorial on how I do my tissue paper printables, I'll leave that link for you down in my description box. Wherever there was some excess tissue paper, I decided to just fold it over onto the edges of the rabbit, and that just gives it more of a high-end look. So just taking some Mod Podge again and making sure that I just fold everything over and smooth it out with the brush. Usually I go on to Pixabay.com, and that's where I find a lot of the free printables that I use in my designs, but I was not able to find some pretty eucalyptus. So I went on to a different site that I have access to. It's called Creative Fabrica. There are SVGs and vector graphics and fonts and different images and clip art, and there's tons and tons of things on there. I'm going to leave the link that I have for you down in my description box if you want to go and check it out. I'm adding the eucalyptus in the spots where I think it looks pleasing, and then I'm going to do the same thing with some little lilac flowers. Everything that I used today has been printed off on tissue paper. Once the Mod Podge had all dried, I'm taking a small piece of sandpaper and going over the edges that I had distressed originally to pull that paint off. I want to make sure that that distressing is still visible, and because I overlapped the tissue paper quite a few times in some spots, I'm just going to take that portion of the tissue paper off. I still have yet to master the messy bow. For some reason, I just cannot figure it out. There are some people out there who can make a beautiful messy bow. I have not been one of those people. But I think this green ribbon was a little too thick and too stiff, so I ended up taking it out and trying again, and then it worked much better. I glued the bow to the neck of the bunny, and now I'm just adding some of this reindeer moss to the bottom piece of wood. I just want to camouflage that a little bit, so I'm going to add it all the way around the front, the sides, and along the back. I wanted to add some florals, but I didn't want anything to overpower the pattern that's already on the bunny. So I'm taking some of these little baby's breath from the Dollar Tree and I'm trimming them down really nice and short, just going along the front a little bit in some groupings just to give that reindeer moss a little bit more of a pop. I love how this bunny turned out.